Welcome to Aiken Business Matters. I'm your host, John McMichael, and we have as our guest today somebody that I've been trying to get on our program for a while, and we've known each other for several years and have worked together in a couple of projects, and I just wanted you to have a chance to meet him. He's an Aiken product and has done a lot of things, and we wanted to share that with you. So welcome with me today, Mr. Brent Hoover.
Hey, John, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Brent is a professor at USC Aiken, my alma mater, and is in the School of Business, and is Brent teaches. He calls himself a jack of all trades because he teaches a number of different aspects of business, and they all deal with one thing, and that's entrepreneurship. And he is an entrepreneur himself. We'll talk about that later. But Brent, thank you so much for joining us today.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and this was a good time for you because it's spring break.
It is, so it fits exactly with my schedule.
And if everybody sees you smiling extra big today, it's because you had that spring break, right?
Yes, indeed.
When school start back again?
We start back technically next Monday, but I don't teach until next Tuesday.
Good, okay.
So, yes.
So what, as a professor, is your biggest challenge today?
Biggest challenge? I would say making sure every bit of information is strictly applicable. That's the thing. Education has to evolve. When I was coming through as a student, I loved going to USCA, I loved going to UNC Greensboro, but so much of what I learned in the classroom was theoretical. There was no application involved. My best example of application finally came while working on a capstone project for UNCG, where I actually worked as a MBA student consultant on a 4-member team for a Fortune 200 subsidiary. I'm still under confidentiality about that.
Okay.
But the point of the story is it actually got me working on a real-life project that was actually helping a company inside the area. And so when I actually decided to actually go teach at USC Aiken, my main focus was how can I make every one of my courses applicable? And I actually designed entrepreneurship from the ground up, because the way I teach it now is not how it used to be taught. But now I make it sure where it's almost a business training course, because my main goal is making sure my students actually understand how the business world actually works out there. And you're not going to necessarily find that in a textbook.
You're not.
You got to find everything dealing with the regulations and business license, going for here for the city, for the county. You got to make sure you're in accordance with the zoning permits, right? Mm-hmm. You got to know so much about taxes, Schedule Cs, so many things you don't think about. How do you actually hire somebody? How do you engage an independent contractor? What needs to be in the agreement? What needs to be in the contract? So many of these issues, no one actually bothers to teach you. They want to teach you all about how business sort of exists in this world, but nobody actually wants to teach you how to run it on the day-to-day basis. And that's what I really focus on as a professor.
And I can attest to that. Before we get too far into our interview,
yep.
I wanted to really let you kind of give people what your heart was. Now
yep.
Give us a little bit about your background, your bio.
Okay, I am a true Aikenite.
Yep.
I was actually technically born in Augusta, but I've lived here my entire life. Went to USCA as a student, as a business undergrad. I'm actually a filmmaker, but I never went to film school. I knew that, hey, I needed the business background, so I went and got that degree. As soon as I did that, I immediately went and got my master's at UNC Greensboro up in North Carolina. Only 2 years I haven't lived in Aiken, so came back, started up my company, did my film, transitioned down to teaching, and then into my new thing, working for the SBDC.
Now, tell us about the new business, your new position.
Okay, yeah. So I'm recently got hired on as the new business consultant for the Small Business Development Center, also known as the SBDC. It's a national organization, but every state has their own form of it. So we have the South Carolina SBDC and the USCA region. We actually have a location on campus. So the SBDC, when Bob Clark, who was my actual mentor, I was actually a client of the SBDC for many years. So I got to see it from the client side, and now I've sort of built up everything I have for the business. And now I'm transitioning into the consultant side. So I think that's great because I know how SBDC runs. I know what clients need and expect from their consultants. So I can make sure I'm meeting those needs. And because ultimately the SBDC wants to make sure that clients are satisfied, that they're actually helping start up new businesses. And it's really what I'm doing or going to do with the SBDC, is I think I start technically March 20th, is actually a form of what I do in entrepreneurship class. Because I run that as a business training course, making sure buildings, hey, here's a business idea, do the plan, let's actually make it happen. I've already had one student already start up an LLC here. So I said, all right, all I have to do is take that and apply it on a much larger scale. So now, of course, you got to do more research because obviously you can be dealing with potentially a Fortune 500 company that comes in, because it's not just small businesses that want to start up. It's somebody who's maybe been in business for 5 years looking to expand, and they need a soundboard to say, hey, here's a growth strategy. Tell me, is it feasible or not? They may want you to do a discounted cash flow analysis to say, is this the most valuable option? Maybe there's another one. So these are sort of the issues I'm going to have to deal with as a consultant. But all it is essentially a larger scale of what I'm doing right now at USCA. And I really think the SBDC wanted that pipeline into USCA. I'm going to be on campus all 5 days. When I'm not teaching, I'll be consulting. So I will be extremely accessible for the public or any students that say, hey, I got this idea. It doesn't require a lot of capital. I think I can make it a go, but I'd like to get more serious about it. They could transition over to SBC if they wanted to. Now, obviously, I make sure that people know that, oh, there are great other resources such as SCORE. I always want to make sure as a consultant, you know all your options, you'd identify which one is the best route for you.
Well, one thing that you've done, I think, and certainly I noticed it, but I've been fortunate enough, you've asked me to come on campus and teach in one of your classes. Tell us about that.
Okay, so Mick Fakula, who's the dean, who actually hired me for the School of Business, he sat me down one day and we ended up co-creating a new course called Executives in Residence. Now, Dr. Liz Stewart, I'm sure you know Liz.
Yes.
She is the original executive in residence, and it used to be more of a program. We wanted to actually make it a course, where it's now a business leadership seminar. We bring in 26 to 28 speakers every semester. We only run it once a year. We generally run it in the spring, but we want the students to see such a great diversity of speakers, not only on the local scale, but on the statewide, and we've actually brought in some national speakers. We actually had Rick C. Wade, who helped campaign for President Obama. He was instrumental in both of his presidential campaigns. He came in, flew in from D.C., lives in South Carolina, he's at Columbia right now, just drove down for the day, came and spoke. And I thought, hey, students never have access to that kind of resource before. And they loved it. So it's giving them so many options to see multiple fields of business, but how everybody feels on leadership, because there's not one leadership strategy.
Well, people that don't think our young people today have a head for business are really serious about their future.
Yes.
You need to spend some time in one of your classrooms, because you have a bumper crop of young entrepreneurs this year in your class. And I know when I spent time in there, they were just peppering me with questions right and left, which is what I like. You know how I teach and how I like to do. And it really made me feel good, and even since then, I've had one of your students has come to visit me to even talk about more. So I know that what you're doing is making an impact on these young lives.
Yes.
And if they feel that kind of connectivity here at USC Aiken, the opportunities, if they exist here in Aiken for them, they're going to stay in Aiken.
Yes, and that's actually something we're debuting for the future with the School of Business. We're calling it, I believe, the Professional Pathway Program. We're actually going to try to get each one of our students actually a job upon graduation if possible here. If they want to be here, we need to identify where they want to go.
Right.
And once again, it goes back to the application thing, but it's great because when I graduated, I felt like I didn't really have a lot of options here. So that's why I sort of did my route through doing MBA, started up my own film company, and eventually transitioned to professor and consultant. But I want to make sure that students, if they want to stay here in Aiken, they have that option.
Right.
And that's why I'm trying to network with so many different businesses and bringing in their CEOs or their leaders to my classroom, because students, a lot of times, one of my students, he actually met with you after class, right? I've had another student actually had an internship offer. I don't know if he took it or not, but he actually got that by actually sitting down with one of the speakers afterwards and actually just talking to him. And I think that's great, because the more times we can connect the students with actually executives here in Aiken, in the CSRA, it's only going to benefit Aiken even better.
Well, a good friend of mine is and I won't mention him because he's going to be a guest soon, but he went through a number of entrepreneur adventures, he calls them, and failed at every one of them.
Oh, that's actually the best thing about entrepreneur.
Yeah.
I make my students first day interview one. I say, go pick a brain of an entrepreneur, and they always want to go for the most successful entrepreneur they can find. I say, that's great. But they're going to give you a whole spiel about, oh, I did this correctly, and I was great at this. I say, go find somebody who failed.
That's right.
Fell on their butt, and ask them, how did they pull themselves up? Because intelligent failure is one of the most important things you can stress. And I had a speaker come in for executives, Lydia Del Rossi. That's one of her major selling points, intelligent failure. So I'm glad when not only I'm stressing it, but other speakers are as well.
The professor of mine, economics professor, years ago, told me this. He said, failure is only a failure if that's where it stops.
Yeah.
He said, failure should be a foundation for the next success. And he said, you learn from your failures,
Yes.
and you keep on. He said, because you're going to fail at many things.
Oh, yes. And when I do my entrepreneurship class, I actually focus it around all of my failures. I tell them everything that went wrong because my goal is, hey, I did this wrong, but this is what I should have done instead, so please do not make the same mistake as I did.
Right. I've been reading some national publications, and
Yeah.
I'll ask you if you came to the same conclusion I did after reading,
right.
because you're reading different things, I'm sure,
Yes.
and talking to different people. But from everything that I gather from the people that I talk to, I was on the phone last week with a gentleman who has one of the most successful marketing firms in New York.
Wow.
And just talking to him and getting the pulse of what's going on there, it seems like today is a wonderful time for a young person that is interested in entrepreneurship.
It is.
More than ever before in the history of our country.
Well, I'll tell you, technology has a lot of things to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I see that in the world of filmmaking. Technology has lowered the amount of cost of production, but it's not just that. It spans to around. I mean, you have so many access to resources such as YouTube. If you want to know anything, you can find a tutorial on YouTube and teach it to yourself.
Yeah. Well, by the way, this program,
Yes.
we're on YouTube too. So
There you go.
And on the city website, and also
Yes.
on Channel 4 with Atlantic Broadband. So just thought I'd throw that plug in there.
But I
for
feel
the
like
time being.
Young students, they think that, oh, I can't be an entrepreneur because I just got out. Well, no, this is actually one of the perfect times to do it. Because a lot of times you're not married, you don't have a mortgage, you don't have kids, you got all those other responsibilities that eventually come along. This is the time. So if you do fail, guess what? It's not going to have the amount of impact that it could, say, if you were later on in life. And two, I've always been one about following your dreams. Don't hesitate. Don't procrastinate on it. Seize on the opportunity while it's there. Otherwise, it may not be there in 10 years.
Right. If you have a student who is really on track on entrepreneurship,
Right.
has a great business plan,
Yes.
they get started on it, like you just mentioned, one of your students has already formed an LLC.
Yes, here in Aiken, yeah.
And they are starting and they need to put more time in it. Do you recommend that they take a sabbatical from their education to spend more time? That's a tough question, isn't it?
I would probably, this would be my personal opinion, I would say get all your education that you need or want in one sitting.
Right.
Because I will tell you, it is extremely difficult to go back.
Right.
I've seen people that are much smarter than I, far more intelligent, and they only ended up having a bachelor's degree and they're doing what they want, but they feel like, oh, I can't go back because I'm working full time on this case. And I'm always like, you probably want to go ahead and get that education initially. It's out of the way, done. Now you can focus strictly on your career.
Well, this time in our lives, they have that ability to be able to do that.
Now, out of college,
right?
yes.
Yeah, but my generation,
Yeah.
we were interrupted, and the generations before me,
yes.
we had things like World War I, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam, all the different conflicts that we've had in the
Yes.
country. So many of us had to put on a uniform, so we had to stop school and then come back again. So I personally can attest to the fact that it is tougher when you go back the second time. You're a little older and maybe not as wise as you thought you were, but getting back into the groove of studies is more difficult than I thought it would be.
Now, I do teach actually quite a few non-traditional students at USCA, and we're doing things at Palmetto College, but even on campus.
Yeah.
But I really stress to students, education never stops. When I mention education in that sense before, I'm talking about formal education. Informal has to always continue because what you know might be out of date in a couple of years.
Well, I know when I was talking to your class last time, I'd mentioned the fact that you never stop learning.
Yes.
And all the different, regardless of what your vocation is, what you get into, there are always certifications to get,
Absolutely.
credentials, additional initials behind your name, things like that. And it takes time and effort and all that. So you really never stop learning.
No.
Never. If I have a week that I don't learn something, I feel like it's been a wasted week. So,
There you go.
but I still have a lot to learn. So,
Definitely.
let me ask you something, if I could.
Sure.
How in the world did you get involved? We've talked about your education.
Yeah.
We've talked about where you're from here in Aiken. You didn't
Yep.
grow up in Hollywood or Los
Oh, no,
Angeles.
no.
So you just grew up in Aiken.
Yes.
And I think you and Justin Whelan are two people that I know of that are heavily involved in filmmaking right here in Aiken.
That is true, yeah. I never went to film school. The only film class I ever took formally was an elective for right to graduate with my MBA in UNC Greensboro. I knew I always wanted to be a storyteller. As a kid, I was always acting various skits out. Turns out that, transitions into formal filmmaking later on. But in terms of my career path, I knew you needed the business background. Because when it comes to filmmaking, so much of what you think of Hollywood, well, unless you're breaking big, guess what? You're waiting tables. And I did not want to be that. I wanted to know everything related to the business side, and I did not want to be left without a contingency plan. So I went and get to the business. But I was working on a story, eventually became The Odyssey of Destiny, took 13 years, wrote it for a long time, and then, I said, all right, I know the business side of it, now I can actually go and make the film. So I started up my company as soon as I graduated with my MBA in 2013, I think it was in June. It's Hoover Studios LLC, and it's an independent film company here in Aiken, South Carolina. And so that was the vessel I used to create The Odyssey of Destiny. It's a feature-length film, it's won international awards. I wrote, directed, composed the soundtrack, which also won international awards, edited, and sadly made a cameo, though that was not intended. But it was everything I did because, hey, that was my life's passion. And so now how did that end up relating to teaching and SBDC? Well, I think Mick really, he saw that, hey, this guy went out there and he did it. He's a real-life entrepreneur. He's crazy enough to do this, so I'll take a chance on him. And that's sort of how I got involved with USCA, because I stressed that, hey, everything I learned doing the film, I took it, the fundamentals, and kind of incorporated them into my own personal curriculum that I customize. And I think that's how I transitioned into teaching. And then the SBDC sort of saw the same thing in me. Once again, new transition.
Well, you're like so many people. If you follow your passion,
yes,
you bring a lot to the table.
You do, and people will follow you.
Yes.
Further than they initially would.
But one of my old tried and true sayings is to be a good business person, you have to have professionalism.
Absolutely.
You have to have a positive attitude.
Yes.
And you have to have a passion for what you do.
Yes.
And if you have those things, people, like you say, they will follow you.
Yeah. And I really hope that other filmmakers out there see that, look, technology you mentioned before, it's lowering the cost of just doing business. And if you're smart about it, if you use relative cost strategy, maximize the value of every dollar, you can actually create something. Now, will it be risky? Absolutely. I've invested pretty much my entire life savings into creating The Odyssey of Destiny. It was self-financed entirely by myself, and that was a very risky time. Because I told my business students at one point I was worth $150 in cash. That's not a lie. And that was too much of a risk on my part. No, that's being initial. But it proves that, look, this is going to take some risk, but it will pay off. It may not pay off the first time, it may not pay off the second time. But that, once again, goes back to intelligent failure. I'd rather have taken the risk and failed than never to have taken the risk at all. Now, in my case, thankfully, it worked out for me. It helped me get my new positions. And yeah, it works for me, but hey, look, I've made plenty of failures, but believe me, I wouldn't change anything for a moment.
You and I have talked about this, and certainly Dr. Jordan, the chancellor, for those of you who don't know, she's the chancellor at the University of South Carolina here in Aiken, and has done a tremendous job in doing a lot of things to engage and involve the community. When I took over my new position in economic development with the city, I already knew Dr. Jordan through some relationships with Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce and just in general in the community. And I had our city manager, John Clem, really had a passion, both of us and our mayor and city council and most all of us in the city have over the last several years have wanted to see more of a connectivity between the university and the city. And we've certainly come a long way in the last year and a half, I think. Being able to and being invited to participate in a number of different things at the university has been my pleasure. But they say you can't ever come home, but it's nice to go to a learning facility like the university here and see how much has grown since the first day I went to school at Banksia. With a few students as we had. Now we're a world-renowned university. We've got students coming from all over the world, literally, to do things. And I know that Dr. Jordan we were talking earlier this week about the phenomenal success that the university's having, not only in business school, but in the new discipline that you've started in engineering.
Yes.
I mean, that's are the business students interested in engineering at all? I mean, do they take any preliminary, or maybe let me ask this question:
Yeah.
Are the engineering students going to take any business classes? That's
That,
probably it.
I've had one, and I think there's another one. I believe he is an engineering student, and he's an aspiring entrepreneur.
Okay.
And I've talked briefly with him, so I told him, I said, hey, if you're serious about this, you really should, take entrepreneurship.
Right.
Even if it is just for an elective. I feel like it'll benefit him later on.
Well, I can't, talking about that entrepreneurship track that you have over there for students to take.
Yes.
I can't imagine somebody really settling in on a life's vocation without understanding all the different things. And regardless if you're, and I think I heard you say this, if I didn't, I apologize, but I thought I heard you say that regardless of whether you go to work for a Fortune 500 company or yourself, you need to understand what entrepreneurship is.
The fundamentals at the very skeleton level, they don't change.
No.
They do not.
Because you're really managing yourself in your career, and you are a business within a business.
Yes. And I'll tell you, a lot of students, I think they've never looked at actually the numbers involved. One of the exercises I do in entrepreneurship is I talked to HR in USCA, and I actually got the real quotes from, rough estimates from in prior years for health insurance. Because so many people ask them, they're like, how many employees do you want to have? And they're like, oh, I want to have 5 or 6 full time. I said, do you know how expensive it is just to carry one employee with benefits? And I took it down through single with family with kids, and the costs were eye-opening for them.
Yeah.
And I feel like so many of those things, it's like, yes, you need to understand that. Now, believe me, I hope you do. They start businesses and offer benefits for their employees. But you need to understand that that's something that you may not see in other business class. Hey, you need to have a start on it now. So if you actually want to have, say, 2 employees with full-time benefits, well, you're going to need to come up with the capital for that. So,
Have you got any films that you have in the works right now?
I'm currently looking at a feasibility analysis for a new project, for a new feature. If it goes through, if I green light it, it will be shot here in Aiken.
Wow.
So, yes.
That's a good thing.
That is, because that's one thing, one of your other speakers, I'm sure you know him, Will Williams, right?
Yes.
Yes, with the Aiken Economic Development Partnership. Yeah, I'm always talking to him, and he's always asking me, am I doing another film? And I said, well, yeah, if I did, it probably would be here in Aiken, because once again, you want to help stimulate the local economy.
Exactly.
I run, they're very simplified economic analyses for each film I do.
Right.
But even it shows just a micro-budget film that I did for, say, the Odyssey of Destiny. I did one for Brunswick County, essentially where I shot, up in North Carolina. It shows you, it's staggering just what one little production coming in for 2 weeks can do to the local economy.
It is.
So can you imagine what happens when a studio comes in?
It is a great financial boom to any community when you have a filmmaker come into town.
Yes.
It is. Brent, thank you so much for joining us today.
I really appreciate it.
I just want people, and I wanted people to get a sense of what you do at the university, because as we try to relate to the community and to our business community, there's a lot of things that are going on right now that are trying to boost our young people to stay in the community, to give them the assets, the information, and most of all, the encouragement that they need to venture out and do the next latest and greatest thing that's going to hit the market. And we just never know when we're going to have another Steve Jobs come into Aiken.
Well, here's the thing. I'll leave a final note. I love serving with USCA. It's been, seriously, one of my life's passions.
Yeah.
They're going to be, like when I started, they were just sort of like a commuter school. And even in 10 years, they feel like a full campus now. And I hope they continue to grow and do new great things for the students and the city and everyone involved. So.
Well, with professors like you who are interested in the students, not just a paycheck.
Yes.
That makes all the difference in the
does.
world. So as a parent or a grandparent looking for a place for your students to go to school, you know that you're going to entrust them to some quality education here in Aiken through other professors just like Brent Hoover. Brent, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, John. Appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us today at Aiken Business Matters.